Imagine a brand new house with a huge backyard. That's where Timmy and his family moved. It had tall trees perfect for climbing, and a big, grassy area for playing soccer. Timmy was super excited. He loved exploring, and this backyard was like a whole new world. His dad, Mr. Johnson, was really happy too. He had worked hard to buy the house, and he was proud to give Timmy a great place to grow up. That outlet, Mr. Johnson explained, pointing, is connected to the sewage pump. Timmy wrinkled his nose. Sewage? What's that? His dad chuckled. Well, you know when you flush the toilet or take a shower, all that water goes somewhere. In our neighborhood, it goes into a big pipe under the ground. But our house is a little lower than the pipe, so we need a pump to push the water up so it can flow away. Timmy still looked confused. So it's like a water elevator for yucky water? He asked. Exactly, his dad said, smiling. And that outlet gives the pump the power it needs to do its job. It's very important that nothing else gets plugged into it because the pump needs all the electricity it can get to work properly. If something else is using the outlet, the pump might not be strong enough to do its job, and then, well, it would be a smelly mess. He winked. So, promise me you won't touch it, okay? Timmy had seen her walking around the neighborhood with a clipboard, checking to see if lawns were mowed just right and if everyone's trash cans were hidden away properly. He tried to avoid her because she seemed very important. Today, Mrs. Davison was inspecting her rose bushes, which grew right along the fence between her yard and Timmy's. She was wearing gardening gloves and snipping off dead flowers with small scissors. Timmy watched her carefully, hoping she wouldn't notice him. He didn't want to get in trouble for something he didn't even know was a rule. Suddenly, Timmy noticed something strange. Mrs. Davison pulled out a very long, bright orange extension cord from behind her rose bushes. Timmy watched, curious, as she walked over to the outlet near the fence, the sewage pump outlet. She plugged one end of the extension cord into their outlet. Timmy's eyes widened. Then she walked back to her side of the fence and plugged the other end of the extension cord into a big, noisy machine, an electric hedge trimmer. She started trimming her bushes and the trimmer buzzed loudly. Timmy remembered his dad's warning, it's very important that nothing else gets plugged into it. He knew he had to tell his dad. But Mrs. Davison looked so serious and important. Timmy wasn't sure what to do. He watched her trim, his stomach feeling a little bit funny. He knew this wasn't right. That evening, at dinner, Timmy was quiet. He kept thinking about Mrs. Davison and the extension cord. Finally, he blurted out, Dad, Mrs. Davison is plugging something into our backyard outlet. Mr. Johnson stopped eating. What? What do you mean? The next morning, Mr. Johnson waited until he saw Mrs. Davison tending her roses again. He walked over to the fence, trying to smile, but he was still a little bit annoyed. He saw the orange extension cord snaking across the grass to their outlet. Good morning, Mrs. Davison, he said politely. Mrs. Davison looked up, a little surprised. Oh, good morning, Mr. Johnson. I wanted to ask you about something, he continued, pointing to the extension cord. I noticed you've been using our outdoor outlet. Is everything all right? Mrs. Davison frowned slightly. Yes, perfectly all right. Why do you ask? Mr. Johnson took a deep breath. Well, that outlet is specifically wired for our sewage pump. It needs all the power it can get. Using it for other things could cause problems. He tried to explain it in a friendly way, hoping she would understand. He just wanted her to stop using their electricity. Problems? Mrs. Davison raised an eyebrow. What kind of problems? I'm just using a little bit of electricity to trim my hedges. It's not hurting anything. Mr. Johnson tried to explain it more clearly. Well, the sewage pump needs a lot of power, especially when it's working hard. If the hedge trimmer is also using the outlet, the pump might not get enough power. It could even break down, and then... He paused, not wanting to say the words smelly mess to the HOA president. Break down, Mrs. Davison scoffed. That's ridiculous. I've been using that outlet for weeks, and nothing has broken down. Besides, she added, crossing her arms, it's the closest outlet to my hedges. It's much more convenient than running a cord all the way from my house. She looked at Mr. Johnson with a determined expression. It was clear she wasn't planning on stopping anytime soon. This was going to be more difficult than he thought. Later that day, Mr. Johnson sat down with Timmy at the kitchen table. Okay, buddy, he said. I talked to Mrs. Davison, but she doesn't seem to understand why she can't use our outlet. Timmy looked worried. Is she going to keep using it? I think so, Mr. Johnson sighed. She said it's more convenient for her. But it's really important that she doesn't. That outlet is only for the sewage pump. It's like if you tried to plug too many things into one wall socket inside the house. The power could go out, or even worse, it could be dangerous. So, if she keeps using it, the yucky water elevator might break. Timmy asked, remembering his dad's earlier explanation. Exactly, Mr. Johnson said. And that would be a big problem. We need to figure out a way to make her understand. He tapped his fingers on the table, thinking, maybe we can put a lock on the outlet. But Mr. Johnson continued, if we put a lock on it, she might get really angry and try to break it. She's the HOA president and she's used to getting her way. Timmy thought for a moment. Maybe we could just ask her again, but be really, really nice. So, the next day, Timmy and his dad went to see Mrs. Davison together. Mr. Johnson brought a plate of cookies that Mrs. Johnson had baked. They found Mrs. Davison watering her roses. Mrs. Davison, Mr. Johnson said, offering the cookies, we brought you a little something. And we wanted to ask you again about the outlet. It's really important for our sewage pump. Could you please not use it? Mrs. Davison took a cookie, but her expression didn't soften. Mr. Johnson, she said, this is a shared community. That outlet is right on the property line. It's practically community property. I have every right to use it. She popped the cookie in her mouth and turned back to her roses, clearly not interested in discussing it further. Timmy felt his hope sink. This wasn't going well at all. Mr. Johnson tried one more time. Mrs. Davison, really, it's not about the electricity bill. It's about the pump. If it breaks, it's going to cost us a lot of money to fix it. Mrs. Davison narrowed her eyes. Oh, I see what you're doing, she said, her voice getting louder. You're just saying that to scare me. You don't want to pay for the electricity I'm using. You're trying to save money by making up a story about a broken pump. No, that's not true. Mr. Johnson protested, but Mrs. Davison wasn't listening. Well, I'm not falling for it, she declared, turning away from them. I'm the HOA president and I know my rights. I'll use whatever outlet I want. She stormed off toward her house, leaving Timmy and his dad standing there, stunned. Timmy felt like crying. He knew something bad was going to happen. Mrs. Davison just wouldn't listen. A few days later, Timmy was playing in the backyard when he heard a strange noise. It was coming from near the fence, from the direction of the sewage pump. It was a sort of gurgling, sputtering sound, like a monster trying to talk with a mouth full of rocks. He ran inside to tell his dad. Dad, the sewage pump is making weird noises. Mr. Johnson rushed outside with Timmy. They listened closely. The pump was definitely struggling. It sounded like it was having a hard time pushing the water. Oh, Mr. Johnson said, his face grim. That's not good. It sounds like it's not getting enough power. He glanced over at Mrs. Davison's yard. She was, of course, trimming her hedges, the orange extension cord plugged firmly into their outlet. He sighed. He knew this was happening because of her. The pump was starting to give up. Back inside the house, Mr. Johnson and Timmy tried to figure out what to do. We have to do something, Mr. Johnson said, pacing back and forth. That pump is going to break down completely if she keeps using that outlet. Can we put a lock on it? Timmy suggested. Mr. Johnson sighed. I thought about that, but I'm worried Mrs. Davison will just break the lock. She seems pretty determined to use that outlet, and she might think she's allowed to since she's the HOA president. They sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to come up with a solution. It was like trying to solve a really hard puzzle. They needed to find a way to make Mrs. Davison understand without making her even angrier or causing her to do something drastic. It felt impossible. Suddenly, Timmy's eyes lit up. I have an idea, he exclaimed. Maybe we can make a sign. A sign, Mr. Johnson said, raising his eyebrows. What kind of sign? A really big one, Timmy replied excitedly. With big, colorful letters and pictures. We can write, this outlet is only for the sewage pump. And we can draw a picture of the pump and a big, red X over a hedge trimmer. Mr. Johnson smiled. It was a good idea. Maybe Mrs. Davison would understand a clear, simple message, especially if it was made by a kid. That's a great idea, Timmy. Let's do it. Timmy grabbed his art supplies, markers, crayons, and a big piece of cardboard. He carefully wrote out the message in big, bold letters, using every color he could find. He drew a picture of the sewage pump, making it look like a friendly robot, and then a big, scary hedge trimmer with a bright red X over it. He even added a little picture of a toilet with a sad face to show what would happen if the pump broke. He worked hard to make it clear and impossible to misunderstand. The next morning, Timmy and his dad carefully taped the sign to the fence right next to the outlet. It was impossible to miss. The bright colors and bold letters practically shouted the message. They even used extra tape to make sure it wouldn't blow away in the wind. They stood back to admire their work. "Do you think she'll see it?" Timmy asked, a little nervously. "I'm sure she will," Mr. Johnson said, trying to sound confident. "It's pretty hard to miss. Hopefully she'll finally understand." Later that day, Timmy peeked out the window. Mrs. Davison was in her yard tending her roses. She walked right past the sign, glanced at it briefly, and then plugged in her extension cord. Timmy's heart sank. She had seen the sign, but she just didn't care. He ran to tell his dad. It was worse than they thought. What were they going to do now? Days turned into a week, and Mrs. Davison continued to use the outlet every single day. Timmy and his dad watched, helpless, as the sewage pump groaned and sputtered more and more. It sounded like it was about to explode. Then, one afternoon, Timmy was playing outside when he heard a loud thump followed by nothing. The sewage pump was silent. He ran to get his dad. Mr. Johnson went to investigate. He opened the little door that covered the pump and peered inside. "Oh no," he said, his voice heavy with dread. "It's dead. The pump is completely broken." And then they smelled it. A terrible, stinky smell filled the air. It was coming from the broken sewage pump. The yucky water elevator had stopped working, and now all that yucky water was starting to back up into their yard. It was the smelly mess they had been trying so hard to avoid. Mr. Johnson knew what he had to do. He had to call a plumber. And he knew it was going to cost a lot of money. He called the plumber and explained the situation. The plumber said he would come as soon as possible, but it might take a few hours. Timmy and his dad spent the next few hours trying to clean up the mess as best they could, but it was a losing battle. The smell was awful and the yucky water kept coming. Timmy was really upset. He felt like it was all Mrs. Davison's fault. Finally, the plumber arrived. He took one look at the situation and shook his head. "That's a mess, all right," he said. "Let's see what we can do." He started to examine the broken pump, and that's when he noticed something else. He pointed to the outlet. "See that extension cord plugged in there?" he asked. Mr. Johnson nodded. "Yes, that's Mrs. Davison's. She's been using it to power her hedge trimmer." The plumber shook his head. "That's your problem right there. These pumps are designed to run on a specific amount of power. When you overload the circuit like that, it can burn out the motor. It's like trying to run too many appliances on one outlet in your house. It's too much for the system to handle." He picked up the burnt-out motor and showed it to Mr. Johnson. "See? Fried. This is definitely from electrical overload." Mr. Johnson felt a surge of anger. He knew it. Mrs. Davison's stubbornness had caused all of this. He took a deep breath to calm himself. He knew what he had to do. He had to confront Mrs. Davison, and this time he had proof. Mr. Johnson marched over to Mrs. Davison's yard, the plumber following close behind, carrying the burnt-out motor. Mrs. Davison was, predictably, trimming her hedges. "Mrs. Davison!" Mr. Johnson called out, his voice firm. Mrs. Davison stopped trimming and looked up, a little surprised. "Yes, Mr. Johnson?" "I think you need to see this," Mr. Johnson said, gesturing to the plumber. "This is the plumber. He just looked at our sewage pump and he says it broke down because of electrical overload." The plumber stepped forward, holding up the burnt-out motor. "This motor is fried," he said. "It's a classic case of electrical overload. And it looks like it was caused by someone using that outlet for something other than the pump." He pointed to Mrs. Davison's extension cord. "That extension cord right there is the culprit." Mr. Johnson watched Mrs. Davison carefully, waiting for her reaction. Would she finally understand? Mrs. Davison looked from the burnt-out motor to the extension cord, then back to Mr. Johnson and the plumber. Her face slowly turned red. "Oh," she said quietly. "Yes, oh," Mr. Johnson replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "This whole mess, the broken pump, the stinky yard, the expensive plumber bill, it's all because you wouldn't listen to us. We tried to tell you that outlet was only for the sewage pump." Mrs. Davison looked down at her feet. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Timmy, who had been watching from the window, held his breath. He had never seen Mrs. Davison look so small. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't realize," she said. I just thought it was more convenient." She looked up at Mr. Johnson, her eyes filled with something that looked like shame. "I didn't know it would cause this much damage." "Well," Mr. Johnson said, his voice softening a little, "the important thing is that you understand now. This cost us a lot of money to fix, and it was a really unpleasant experience for everyone." Mrs. Davison nodded miserably. "I know," she said. "I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do?" Mr. Johnson thought for a moment. Well, he said, the plumber bill is pretty high. Maybe you could help us pay for it. Mrs. Davison's face lit up a little. Yes, she said eagerly. I'd be happy to. I insist. It's the least I can do. Mr. Johnson smiled. Okay, he said. That would be a big help. He looked at Mrs. Davison, and for the first time he saw her not as a strict HOA president but as a person who had made a mistake and was willing to make it right. Maybe, just maybe, this whole experience could lead to something positive. Timmy ran outside to join his dad and the plumber. He looked at Mrs. Davison, who was still standing there looking sad. He felt a little bad for her. Mrs. Davison, he said, it's okay. Accidents happen. Mrs. Davison smiled weakly at Timmy. Thank you, Timmy, she said. That's very kind of you. The plumber finished up his work installing a brand new sewage pump. Mr. Johnson paid him and Mrs. Davison wrote a check for half the amount. The stinky mess was finally gone and everything was back to normal, or at least a new normal. As Mrs. Davison walked back to her house, she took one last look at the outlet and the sign Timmy had made. She knew she would never plug anything into that outlet again. She had learned a valuable lesson about listening to others and respecting their property. And she knew that being the HOA president didn't mean she could do whatever she wanted. It meant she had to be a good neighbor. The next few weeks were different. Mrs. Davison seemed much more relaxed. She still cared about the neighborhood rules, but she wasn't as strict about the little things. She even smiled more often. One day, Timmy was playing in his yard when Mrs. Davison came over to the fence. Timmy, she said, I was wondering if you could help me with something. Timmy was a little surprised. Sure, Mrs. Davison, he said. What is it? Well, she said, I'm trying to plant some new flowers, but I'm having trouble reaching the back of the flower bed. Would you mind helping me dig a little? Timmy grinned. He loved digging. I'd love to, he said. And so, Timmy and Mrs. Davison spent the afternoon together, planting flowers and laughing. Timmy realized that even though Mrs. Davison was the HOA president, she was also just a person and people can change. And sometimes, even a stinky mess can lead to a beautiful friendship. That summer, Timmy's backyard was the best in the neighborhood. The new sewage pump worked perfectly, and the yucky water stayed where it belonged. Mrs. Johnson's garden flourished, filled with colorful flowers and delicious vegetables. And Timmy had a new friend in Mrs. Davison. She even started organizing neighborhood picnics and games in the park. She wasn't just the HOA president anymore, she was a part of the community. And every time Timmy saw Mrs. Davison, he remembered the stinky mess and the burnt-out motor. He remembered how stubborn she had been and how angry his dad had gotten. But he also remembered how she had apologized and helped to fix the problem. He learned that even people who seem difficult can change, and that sometimes all it takes is a little understanding and a colorful sign to make a big difference. And he always made sure to keep an eye on that outlet, just in case. After all, some lessons are worth remembering. Years later, Timmy and his family still told the story of the HOA president and the sewage pump outlet. It always got a laugh, especially when they described the stinky mess and Timmy's colorful sign. Remember the time Mrs. Davison plugged her hedge trimmer into the yucky water elevator outlet? Mr. Johnson would say, chuckling. And remember the look on her face when the plumber showed her the burnt-out motor? Mrs. Johnson would add. Even Timmy's friends loved the story. It was a reminder that even the most serious situations can have a funny side, and that sometimes the best way to deal with a problem is with a little bit of humor and a lot of understanding. And every time they told the story, Timmy would think about Mrs. Davison not as the strict HOA president, but as a friend. He realized that everyone makes mistakes, and what matters most is how we learn from them. And he was grateful that even a stinky mess could lead to a happy ending. One spring, the HOA considered a new rule: all houses had to be painted the same shade of beige. Some neighbors were very upset. Mrs. Davison, however, listened to everyone's concerns. She remembered how it felt to have her voice ignored. Instead of forcing the rule, she organized a neighborhood meeting. She listened to everyone's ideas and helped them find a compromise. They decided to allow a few different colors as long as they were all approved by a committee. Timmy watched Mrs. Davison during the meeting. She was still organized and efficient, but she was also kind and understanding. She had learned that being a good leader meant listening to others and finding solutions that worked for everyone. He smiled. Mrs. Davison was still the HOA president, but she was a different kind of president. She was a president who cared. And that made all the difference in the world. The neighborhood was a better place because of it. And as Timmy grew older, he remembered the lesson he had learned that summer: even difficult people can change. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of patience, a lot of understanding, and a very clear sign to make a big difference. He learned that clear communication is important even if it means drawing a picture of a sad toilet. He also learned that it's important to stand up for what you believe in, even if it means confronting someone who seems powerful or intimidating. He had been a little scared of Mrs. Davison at first, but he had found the courage to speak up and it had made a difference. And so, Timmy grew up to be a kind and understanding person, always willing to listen to others and always ready to help. He knew that even the stickiest situations could be resolved with a little bit of empathy and a whole lot of communication. And he never forgot the importance of that little outlet in his backyard. It was a reminder that even the smallest things can have a big impact and that sometimes the most important lessons are learned in the most unexpected places.